The crow. I first saw one a mere 3 years ago. It was a beautiful morning, and I was walking to school in the crisp Swiss September air, when suddenly something swooped past. I turned immediately and stood in shock, staring at a crow. It was the biggest bird that I had ever seen, massive, menacing, and marvelous. You see, I grew up in the rapidly developing city of Beijing. And in 1958, the Chinese government launched the Four Pests campaign. They mobilized the entire population and set off to eradicate rats, flies, mosquitoes, and the Eurasian sparrow. This small brown bird fed on grain seeds, which led the leaders of China and the people to believe that they were being robbed of their labors. They began shooting them out of the sky, destroying their nests, stealing their eggs, and even banging pots and pans to prevent them from returning to the ground. They almost annihilated the sparrow population, and it was an ecological disaster. The few carnivorous birds that did survive the purge were left with no prey, and I grew up without ever seeing any birds. With the absence of the birds, the locusts arrived that year and devoured the nation's crops. This resulted in what is now recorded as the Great Famine, responsible for the deaths of almost 20 million people. Although the consequences of environmental ignorance are clear, history is repeating itself. The dolphins of Japan are being slaughtered as pest control. The iconic African elephant is being butchered to extinction for its ivory. And the orangutan, one of our closest relatives, is being driven out of the rainforests for their palm oil, for the production of palm oil. The disappearance of these species will damage their entire ecosystems, ranging from ecological imbalances to even changing the physical geography of the landscape. Wildlife populations have declined by 52% in the last 40 years. The number of vertebrate animals in the wild has halved in a generation. And the worst part is that we know that the global importance of conservation. We know that we must nurture the knowledge and curiosity necessary to ensure the preservation of biodiversity on this planet. And we know that it is our moral responsibility as a species capable of grasping and appreciating our wildlife to conserve the planet we share. You may agree with me in thinking that allowing this to happen is madness. Stephen Fry asks us to imagine that you're sitting in your chairs and you need to go to the bathroom. But rather than getting up and walking all the way to the bathroom, you sit here and you wet yourself. And then you sit in this cold, uncomfortable mess for the rest of the conference. And then the next person comes along and has to sit in your mess. It's a bit silly, isn't it? But this is how we're treating the environment. But if destruction comes about through the billions of tiny actions in our daily lives, then perhaps the conservation of it will depend on that too, those day-to-day choices that we make. I know you've heard it before, but perhaps we need to keep repeating it. And I will tell you once again, we need to change now. It's pointless to wait for the politicians. It's up to us, as citizens of the earth, to begin the long and frustratingly slow march towards a sustainable coexistence. The Chinese government has now said that one of their priorities is harmony between human beings and nature. Whether we should believe this or not is another question. Our very world is putrefying before our eyes, and our essence as living things and our place in this world is endangered. We must begin fighting for our survival and our planet's survival so that we may restore the harmony between humans and nature and continue to revel in the beauty or the ugliness of all natural creatures, including the crow. Thank you.